I'm going to talk a little bit about the primary elections, kind of a timeline, some of the key things that are happening. We'll touch on the fact that unaffiliates get a vote for the first time. I know Wayne's going to have a fair amount on that presentation too. Talk a little bit about our efforts in communicating out to folks, but we're also going to need your help to help amplify that message and get it out to more people. We'll talk a little bit about cybersecurity because that's been in the news, right? It's an important thing that we make sure, we make sure from a physical standpoint that our ballot is secure when it comes to being mailed to you, and we check signatures, and we have a paper trail chain of custody throughout the whole process of the election so that we assure the paper side is secure. But now we have these other threats that we have to safeguard and ensure that the voice of the people is heard and it accurately reflects what the wishes of the voters are. So a little bit about our election team. We're about the same size as Denver. They're just a smidge bigger as far as number of registered voters. They have 24, 25, 26 people. We do with a smaller staff. We're very fiscally conservative with respect to that, but we have an excellent team. From Angie Leith is back there in the back corner. If Angie can raise her hand. We have dozens and dozens of years of expertise, and they're very good at their craft. We have 9 of our 11 staff members that are state certified. You say, well, Chuck, what about the 2 other ones? What's with that? Well, one hired yesterday, so it's going to take a little time, and the other one, in about 4 weeks. But I'm sure by the end of the primary, they will have their state certification. Something that we're very proud of, CIRA certified. It's a national certification of election administrators. There's about 800 in the country, and we have 8 of them here in El Paso County. And we have a lot here in the state too. The state of Colorado with Secretary of State and the other clerk and recorders, we have really embraced that national certification so that we are at the best possible that we can deliver election services to our citizens. We're also award winning. We're very proud of the fact that we have received excellence in a number of things, from the National Association of Secretary of States to our work with the reserves in the 7 Seals Award, a number of innovation awards from here locally and also from the National Association of Counties about our efficiency in administrating elections, the Independence Award for our outreach, our voter engagement, and then also from the Election Assistance Commission, our Clearly Award for our outreach to the disabled community. So we're very proud of the work we do. Military and overseas voters. So just last week, we completed that effort. We had a little over 4,000 ballots that we sent out. Many of them were mailed, some of them were emailed. They accord that luxury of being able to send a ballot electronically encrypted to them. So military and overseas voters, citizens that find themselves overseas for whatever reason, can vote, and they get the extra time. So they get their ballots 45 days before the election. You and I will get our ballot sometime after June 4th. We get 21 days. And then on the back end, military and overseas voters get an initial 8 days after the election, because those ballots have to come from all over the 4 corners of the world often. So election primary. So the beginning of this, the Secretary of State, Wayne Williams, certifies what's going to be the content on the ballots, but we had a bit of a detour this time, Wayne, didn't we? We had a few court challenges that people were trying to get on the ballot, so that was delayed a little bit to us, but we were able to get that done. And normally that's about a whole week process to lay it out on the ballot, but last year we invested in technology, state-of-the-art equipment that Secretary of State Wayne Williams put us on that pathway to having a unified system in the state. Before that, there was like 11 different systems that were employed by the 64 counties. So we are close to having a uniform election system throughout the state. And with that new system, we were able to do it, what, in Carl, a day? Maybe a day and a half, do that layout process. So we were able to get right back on schedule because of that. Like I said before, we sent out our ballots. Unaffiliated voter preference, this is something that's with Proposition 108 that Wayne will talk a little bit more about. We have until May 29th that unaffiliated voters can state a preference. They'll still remain unaffiliated, but they can make a preference as to what ballot they get, so that can save them the postage and us the printing in getting a ballot. So they can state a preference. They'll still remain unaffiliated, but that preference goes away with the next election. Currently this weekend, we started printing our ballots. Our vendor started printing our ballots, and they started inserting yesterday. We have a team of folks that are going out to the vendor later. Well, they're there now. So, and they'll be spending the next couple days checking that all the ballot packets were inserted correctly, doing the QC, the quality control portion of it, so that we can drop it in the mail stream a little later next month. Public logic and accuracy testing. So we test our equipment. So we get a test deck of ballots that has every possible combination of votes, and we run them through each of our scanners and ensure that all 8 of them tabulate the correct way, and then they're sealed, they're certified and sealed, and then we do the election, and then after the election, during canvass, we do that all over again to make sure that the machines that were tabulating the ballots were the same on the day that they were tested to the day that they were retested after the election. So that is a public process, and we ask people to participate and come and watch that process. That'll be the day after Memorial Day. Also, the day after Memorial Day is the last day for affiliated voters. If you're a Democratic voter, you can change your affiliation to Republican or Republican to Democrats. That's the last day that you can do that and vote in the primary. And then the 29th is the last day for an unaffiliated voter. If they choose to select a preference, if they don't select a preference, they'll get 2 ballots. Ballots will enter the mail stream on June 4th. Some people, we have a mail, our mail processing center is now in Denver, so our ballots will be transferred up there and then brought down. Some people, as early as late in the day on June 4th, probably June 5th in the Monument area. They might get their ballots in the mailbox Tuesday or Wednesday of that week. The rest of the people will probably get Wednesday, Thursday, or Friday. If you do not receive your ballot by like the 8th of June, that Friday after your delivery of that day, we'll want you to call our office at 575-VOTES and let us know. Also on June 4th, our first VSPC opens up. That stands for Voter Service and Polling Location. And then on June 18th, we're required in El Paso County to have as many VSPCs at this stage in the primary as we have motor vehicle offices. So we have 5 motor vehicle offices. We have one on the main floor here at Citizen Service Center, one at Union and Research at Union Town Center. We have the Powers and Airport one that services the southeast. We have the downtown one at Centennial Hall. And then we opened up an office now, coming up almost 2 years now, at Fort Carson. So that is our other VSPC. But we go one extra. We'll open 2 additional ones on the day before election. The 18th is also the last day for someone who wants to register and receive a ballot in the mail, because it takes a little time to get to you. Anything after the 18th, we need you to come into one of our voter service and polling locations, and we'll print up a ballot. We have machines that can print that ballot on demand and give that to you, and you can take that home or you can vote it there that day. Followed by June 20th, which is our last day that we recommend that you return mail by the United States Postal Service, because, like I said, our ballots got to get picked up and go to Denver and then get processed. And it doesn't happen always, but sometimes I've seen, we can track on the barcode on your mail, we can track where that ballot is in that mail stream. And there's been a couple times where we've seen a ballot go up to Denver, come back down, go back up to Denver, and down a couple times before it finally drops into our lap. So we want you to, be able to do that and have time. So that's the last day that we recommend that you return your ballot by the Postal Service. But we have 24/7 drop boxes that I'll show you the locations here in a moment, that you can do that without having to pay postage. And then the Monday before the election, we have 2 additional VSPCs that open at one at the Independence Center and then in the Monument in the Town Hall. Primary day is Tuesday, the 26th of June. All ballots need to be returned by 7 p.m., except if you're a military overseas ballot, your ballot has additional 8 days. And then canvass that's when we go over and we have our canvass board that reviews our processes, what we did, and then certifies and make it from an unofficial election result to an official election result. And then we have our risk limiting audit, and that is a very robust way of us being able to tell our voters that we got the results correct. And I know Wayne's going to talk a little bit more about that and how we are best in the country because of that. Just a reminder, so June 4th to 16th, Citizen Service Center, voter service and polling location. From the 18th to the 26th, we opened 4 additional ones: Union Town Center up north, southeast at Powers, Centennial Hall downtown, and Fort Carson. And then the day before election and election day, we will be open at all locations on the Monday before election and election day from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. That's in addition to what we've done in the past. And then also the Saturday before the election, June 23rd, at our VSPCs will be open from 8 to 1 for those that want to take advantage of that service. So what can you do at a voter service and polling center? You can register to vote if you have not already. You can update your registration. You can replace a ballot. If you spoiled it, misplaced it, can't find it, spilled coffee on it in the morning, you can get a replacement there. If you need to vote on an ADA accessible voting machine, you can do that. Or you can drop off your ballot. Here's our VSBC locations. Shows the 5. And I think what I'd like to show you is the thing that the graph in the corner there is where we put our VSBCs on our drop boxes are based where the population is. We try to make it geographically so that people can get to them in a reasonable way. So if you see on the left the drive time, if you go down the column and you go to the 10 to 15 minute, it shows how many voters, all of those above it, but over to the side, the cumulative. So our 5 VSPCs, 92%, 91.99% are within 15 minutes. So that's why we place them where they are now. In a general election, we'll have in El Paso County 28 VSPCs, and the numbers will be even more relevant because it'll show a lot more people that are even closer to a VSPC. Our mail ballot drop-off locations, we have 15 locations that are throughout the county, and that information is on our website. It's also when you get your ballots after the 4th, we have all that information listed on the side there. And of those 15 locations, you can see 10 to 15 minutes, 98.6% of the population is within that time. It's the people that are out in the Eastern Plains that have a little bit longer, a little farther to go, but they're usually into Fountain or Falcon, usually once or twice a week to get groceries or do shopping and stuff like that. And there's locations in each of those that they can drop off their ballots and save the postage. Ballot update. This number will slightly change between now and June 4th, but we are mailing 378,000 ballots to voters. We'll be sending to 81,000, almost 82,000 Democratic voters, 156,000 Republican voters, and the new voters that get to participate in this election, 140,000 unaffiliated voters. Past primary returns, not as robust as it is in a presidential year, right? Wayne, what did we have? Around 83% in Colorado, I think it was. Kind of, what did we, 3rd in the nation, I think? 4th, oh, okay. I demand a recount, Wayne. So, about 20% on average return in primary elections. Our modeling, our forecasting, we project what we think plus some because we have to over-plan for how many that might come. So will we get 161,000-ish or so? I'm not sure. But that's what our work plan suggests. So it would be great if we could get that number or more. And
what would be the percentage for the total projected? That's over 19%.
Yes, that would be probably, I think, what we planning for planning purposes around 40%.
We were because of the unaffiliated.
Yep. If If you look at how many ballots are returned by mail and how many are by VSPCs, voter service and polling locations, you can see that probably 95% of people will vote from the comfort of their home and return their ballots, but 4 or 5% will vote by going to one of those VSPCs. I'll touch lightly on this because Wayne is going to talk quite a bit about the effort there. So of the 140,000 unaffiliated voters, so far we have just a little under 4,000 that have picked a preference. And that, Angie, that's probably what, around 3%, right? Yeah. So of that nearly 4,000 voters, or 3% of the voters, 2,230 have picked a Republican preference, and 1,646 have picked a Democratic preference. What have we done? We've had a number of press releases. We've done events on radio stations, TV interviews. We had a Gazette article. We've done a lot of stuff with social media trying to educate folks, but there's still a lot of work to be done, and would ask that you tell your friends and neighbors that in this election, if you don't pick a preference, you'll get 2 ballots, but just return one, because if you vote both of them, that will disqualify your vote. And then from the cybersecurity standpoint, Wayne's led the effort with respect to that with his IT team, and Homeland Security has introduced resources. We have partnered with the Secretary of State Homeland Security, our county IT, and we have our own little small IT department contained in our office. And we've formed this partnership to be a vanguard to make sure that we monitor and look for threats. You've probably seen in the news, and I know Wayne's going to talk a little bit about, cybersecurity and how Colorado became the safest state to cast a vote. And I'll let Wayne talk a bit more about. But we've been in the news a lot in the last couple of weeks that you can rest assured here in Colorado that it is the safest place in the country to vote. And that's a lot because of Wayne and his leadership and his staff in helping put us in that place along with the help of 64 county clerk and recorders and the like. So a couple articles there. Another thing that we've done is process improvement. Is while we upgraded our election tabulating equipment and we're able to tabulate ballots quicker with less labor and at the highest level of accuracy, the processing side was always a very manual process. So the ballots come in, they get stamped as to what ballot box they come out of, so that we can look at that historical data. We check the signatures. We check the signature of everyone. Some people say, well, do you really check those? Yes, we do. We do check those. And we check that with human beings checking the current signature on file. But we're getting bigger and bigger, the number of ballots as a county that we are counting and tabulating. And with the increased voter registration and changes in election law with Proposition 107, which we will have presidential primaries, and in 2020 we're going to have a presidential primary, and then shortly after that we got to turn around and run a statewide primary for other offices, and then we have a general election. That's a very short time frame to do all the things that we need to do. So we've invested in a ballot sorting machine that will analyze the signature, much like a bank. When you send a check through the mail and they process it, they're checking that signature, that same software, that same algorithm that checks and verifies that that is you who wrote that check, is some of the same software that is utilized by that machine. So it checks signatures. Now there's some signatures that the machine can't, and we have human beings that do that portion. And it can do it at 10,000 pieces an hour, and a machine doesn't get tired, right? They don't go on break. They don't have, lunch breaks and coffee breaks, but they continues to go through and they do the same operation over and over again very quickly. So that's a investment that we've done here in El Paso County, and we'll answer questions at the end. But if you have questions, contact us at 575-VOTE or at 575-8683, or go to our website, epcvotes.com. That stands for El Paso County, or you can also get some of that same information on Wayne Williams' website, Secretary of State, at Go Vote Colorado. All right. Carl, can you, do I have to exit out of here to get Wayne's up? Okay, all right.
Did you want this up?
While they're doing that, there's all sorts of exciting spiff here. There are sample ballots up here at the front. There are my business cards back there that have my contact information. I still live here in Colorado Springs, so the best way to reach me is call me at 6:30 in the morning because I am driving from Colorado Springs to Denver during that time. I usually leave a little bit before 6 so I can get up to Denver before the rush hour gets bad. So now we have...
You do it or you want to do it?
I can do it. Thanks. Thank you, Chuck. So I am Colorado's 38th Secretary of State. I go and visit every single county clerk across the state. Sometimes it's an interesting experience. So if you try to go from Fairplay to Leadville, Google Maps thinks that Mosquito Pass is the way to go. It is not. Just clarifying. So we headed up, it kind of looked okay, and then we turned around, went around a U-turn or a hairpin turn, and that's what was ahead of us. And at that point, we abandoned hope and went around. Here's the basic numbers. Colorado has 3.8 million registered voters. There are more unaffiliates than either Democrats or Republicans. When we look at the 2016 election, the most recent presidential, Colorado has the highest percentage of registered voters in America. No one else tops us in that. And you can see that most people voted by mail, and our 74.5% turnout was the fourth highest in that election. There are 3 states that beat us. They all border Canada, and there's nothing else to do once winter sets in there. So these are the actual numbers. And so 74.5% of the registered voters and 71.9% of the eligible voters. So even if we include those not registered. So we're proud of what we do here. We have online voter registration. GoVoteColorado.com has actually reached, since my staff prepared the slide, 2 million transactions. We have passed that threshold now. By the way, Chuck didn't mention it, if you have moved, please go to GoVoteColorado.com, update your address so that your ballot gets mailed to the right address, because otherwise it will not show up. Because the post office cannot forward ballots, because if you moved, even if you moved a couple blocks, you might be in a different district. I moved from the other one side of Research Parkway to the other when we downsized with the kids going, and I switched state senate districts, and so my ballot is different. We also do things to try to help high school kids get registered to vote. So I established the Eliza Pickerel Route Award for schools that get 85% of their graduating seniors to register to vote. This is me at Arupe Jesuit High School up in Denver. League, I need your help. We have not had much in the way of presentations to high schools in the Pikes Peak area. And so I am exhorting you to assist, to help work with folks, and we need to get them registered. And so I would like to give out a lot of, by the way, Eliza Pickerel Route, you're the League of Women Voters, you should know who she is.
I did.
You did? Eliza Pickerel Route was a suffragette here in Colorado, wife of the governor. She was the first woman to register to vote in Colorado. And so that's why we have named the award for high schools that get 85% of their graduating seniors to register to vote. There are all sorts of high schools that have done it. I've been out of the Eastern Plains giving the award to a high school that has 8 graduating seniors. So it wasn't that hard to get 85%, but you did have to get them all. I was just up at Fairview High School, though, in Boulder, which had a graduating class of more than 400, and they managed to do it as well. So this is one of the fun things that I get to do, and I and my staff go around. It's a program that I started, and I think it's important. We also want to make sure that military members can vote. So this black on blue slide is not very easy to read, but I will tell you that Colorado has the second highest percentage of UOCAVA voters. And last week we had the Armed Forces lunch here, UOCAVA, Uniformed Overseas Citizens Absentee Voter Act. Yeah, it does get a little better that way. And a soldier came up and talked to me, and I asked him if he could kind of let me have that information, and I want to share with you what he wrote, because there are a number of individual military families. He said, as a native Coloradan, I'm extremely proud of our state's voting process. In 2016, I was stationed in Iraq, and the mail was taking 1 to 3 months to arrive. Now, when Chuck said we mail out the ballots to the military ahead of time, that's why. It's not like here where your Netflix shows up a couple days later, 1 to 3 months. We also have, by the way, an ability to electronically transmit that ballot. Said using the FVAP, that's the Federal Voting Assistance Program, postcard was too slow to send and receive in time for votes to count. After talking to our soldiers about the importance of ballot initiatives and not just political positions, I had 12 out of 30 registered to vote, some to vote for their first presidential election ever. I have voters from Mississippi, Illinois, California, Texas, and mostly Colorado. People from the non-Colorado states had much more trouble getting help voting, and California refused to send an electronic ballot when the mail did not reach us in time. However, all Colorado voters who wanted to vote were able to vote. I had soldiers from Teller, El Paso, Douglas, Elbert, and Denver counties. All of them were able to communicate to their counties to get their electronic email ballots and to cancel their mail-in ballot. Colorado is on the forefront of providing dynamic election support in a changing world where ballots may not reach soldiers overseas. I cannot stress how important it was for soldiers to vote, especially on ballot measures and propositions that affect their quality of living when they return home. Federal voting program could work for elections, but is severely lacking in support for these important ballot measures. The support from County Elections Department made all the difference in the world. That's one, and I had no idea. When this guy came up to me at the luncheon last week and said, I want to talk to you, you never know as an elected official how that's going to go. What are they going to complain about? What are they going to talk about? And when he shared this story, I asked him if he'd send it to me, because I think it's important. Sometimes when we deal with legislators, they are not comfortable with the fact that we actually use electronic transmittal to soldiers. In fact, the Center for American Progress, which is a left-of-center group, gave Colorado the nation's top score, a B, for our cybersecurity issues. The thing they marked us down on, the reason we didn't get an A, is because, yes, we will send a ballot to a soldier, to a sailor on a submarine underneath the polar ice cap. We will send that ballot electronically and give them the opportunity to return it. And if my choice is they're going to downgrade me a little bit, or I'm going to let the people who are protecting our right to vote have the right to vote, I know where I'm going to be in that scenario. So Chuck shared the Washington Post. This is just the lead from it. There's a lot more to it, but there's a couple things here that really are the essence of it. The state records every vote on a paper ballot. So before I became Secretary of State, that was not the standard. There was a paper trail if the ticker tape, the little cash register machine worked properly, but it was not a guarantee that there was a paper ballot that you could do it. And then it conducts rigorous post-election audits favored by voting researchers. Nearly every county is equipped with up-to-date voting machines. Now, I got elected, I walked into Colorado counties, and former Commissioner Morrison probably recalls that commissioners are not always excited when state officials tell them they need to spend money on things. And I told them we need to get new voting systems in the state of Colorado that meet new rigorous standards. And working with the commissioners across the state, actually that's out of the Denver Post article, but they had the Twitter picture of Senator Bennett and I discussing some cybersecurity issues. But all the counties in blue have adopted, blue and aqua or whatever that green is, have adopted the new voting system. The slide's actually a couple months old, so Douglas has since adopted a new voting system as well. Interestingly, Montrose's older system is breaking down, and we had to go out and help restore some things, help restore a trusted bill to a backup system. No other state looks like this. If you read the cybersecurity discussions about elections, one of the key factors across the country is that many states, actually almost no other state, has done anything to address updating their election equipment. We did it by providing a little bit of money to the counties to help incentivize them to move. I had a little bit of UOCAVA funds left, and so we incentivized that process. And that helped a number of them to move, and then we talked to them. And fortunately, commissioners and clerks across the state have made the decision to do that. I will note that if you look at Jackson County, they hand count the ballots, so their tabulation system is really unhackable. But it mentioned an audit, Chuck mentioned an audit. Let me tell you what an audit actually involves. In the audit, we randomly determine specific ballots for the audit board, Democrat and Republican, to look at, and they pull a specific ballot. So it's go to box 3, grab the 4th ballot, and they then pull that ballot and they compare it to the record the machine made when it tabulated that ballot, the cast vote record. And so, by the way, the number of ballots polled varies with the closeness of the race. So the closer the race, the more ballots we poll. That's why it's a risk limiting audit, to show that as we get a closer election, we're going to pull more ballots, we're going to look at those, and we're going to make sure. Every county in the state passed that audit. We're the only state that's done it. If you're interested and you're really inspired by this, you can watch a YouTube video. It's about 27 minutes long on Colorado's risk limiting audit. And you'll see professors from MIT and Columbia and Berkeley talk about why Colorado's system is the coolest in the world. And you'll also see Colorado Common Cause talking about why it's an important part, an important step. So we can tell you with assurance in Colorado, we have a paper ballot. Nobody from Russia, nobody from China, nobody from North Korea hacked that paper ballot. And we can tell you that we have an audit that proves that that paper ballot was tabulated correctly and the election results are correct. And that's why the Washington Post said this is the safest place in America to vote. It wasn't easy, by the way, because when we adopted these standards, well, one of my staff members said, now if you do this, there are going to be some people who are unhappy and it's going to cost you and they're going and bad things will happen and they'll whine and they'll complain. And my response to them was, I don't drive all the way to Denver every day to do nothing. And they were right, by the way. I got sued by the vendors that weren't selected. I got sued by a couple counties, including the person who nominated me for this job. So I got sued by my friends. I got a legislative review. Former Representative Morrison remembers the process where legislators in Colorado can pull any rule that's adopted for review. But we passed all of those, we won the lawsuits, and ultimately the commissioners went along with us across the state and helped install this new voting system that provides a much safer way for Coloradans to vote and a way to ensure that process. We actually have a public die rolling session in Denver because how do we pick which ballots to review? Well, there's an open source program that anyone can look at the code at. It's not secret. And then we roll 20 10-sided dice to generate a random number seed that determines which specific ballots are pulled in each of the counties across the state. And it's a public process. So we had folks come into our office and randomly chose who was going to pick a random die out of a bag, and then they rolled the die, generating a random number. So there's like 3 random components of it, so that there was no way possible to game that system, so that you could know that that audit was conducted accurately. Okay. We hit a little bit about Proposition 107. That establishes a presidential primary.
Before you go on,
Marcy.
can you tell me why the other states, or have most of the states adopted this process, or have they not? I mean, I've heard about other states having problems.
Why haven't most others? Well, Rhode Island just adopted it. There's several other states that are considering legislatively adopting it. Part of the reason why you haven't historically is older equipment does not generate a cast vote record, so you can't compare specific ballots. In fact, the older system we had here in El Paso County generated no record of how individual ballots were interpreted. It just gave you the cumulative totals at the end. So you can't do a risk limiting audit in that system. You have to have a system that will generate a cast vote record where you can say, this is how the machine interpreted the fourth ballot in box 6. And if you can't do that, you can't do a formal risk limiting audit. Every state, not every state, most states do at least some auditing. New Mexico is probably the closest. They just randomly pick precincts. They can't choose specific ballots, but they pick specific precincts to do. But a number of states are looking at it. But you have to have the newer system where you can say, this ballot was interpreted in this way. And that's an important part of that process. Otherwise, you get groups. And so, New Mexico's system, which is pretty good, pulls a precinct, but there's no guarantee that there wasn't a problem in a different precinct, a different ballot style, a different configuration. Whereas ours pulls from across the entire pool of
But
ballots.
is it money that keeps the states from doing it?
Money, and in some cases, lack of priority, lack of emphasis.
Fear of change, too.
Fear of change. If it ain't broke, don't fix it.
But with what's going on in the country, you would think it would be the top priority.
It should be. But Colorado's system that we'd went through, so it started when I was clerk here. I was serving on the Uniform Voting System Advisory Committee. And then we identified 4 systems and recommended there be pilot elections where we try out the systems. So in the 2015 coordinated election, we tried out all of the systems in a big county on the Front Range and then in a rural county. And so we tried out 4 different systems in 8 different counties to find out how they actually worked. Because the dog and pony show a vendor might give you isn't really a representation of how it works. I brought in the disability community to actually test the accessibility functions of the various voting systems. And we went with the one they rated as the highest, the most easily usable. And then we began a couple-year process to get counties to implement. So all told, it was a 4 or 5-year process. So we started long before the 2014 presidential election, 2014 Secretary of State election. We started long before the 2016 presidential election. Other states didn't understand the priority. Now they are starting to pay more attention. But the elections that were run in Georgia today use an electronic system that has no paper record. And that's same thing, it's true in New Jersey. So it's not a party affiliation question, it's a prioritization of state money and of county money. And so yes, there was probably a road pothole that wasn't repaired because we did that in El Paso.
I was going to say, what if the feds incentivize the these states, make sure they have the money?
So the federal government just did an allocation of the final UOCAVA money. It's another $380 million. Colorado shares about $6 million. I've actually tomorrow, the Bipartisan Election Advisory Committee in my office is meeting to give input as to how Colorado should spend that money. I will tell you at least 2 things it's going to go to. One of those is expanding the risk limiting audit model to better capture the ability. Right now I can only do county races through it or state races at the county level. I want to be able to do a statewide process. And then it also isn't optimized for some other features that we want to make better. The other thing we're going to do is this September, we're bringing, and my office is paying for this out of these HAVA funds, all of the counties in the state we're going to bring to the Inverness Hotel in southern Denver and do a war game, essentially, of attempted hack and attempted issues And we're going to bring not just their clerk, but an IT person from the county, someone else who, I think it's about 4 people from each county to say, how do we help them? So they have just allocated some money. We don't need it to buy the systems because we have the systems. Some other states, I think, will probably use it more on purchasing the system side. But they did just do that allocation. It was a couple months ago. It was part of the omnibus budget package that passed. So whatever the other issues were in the omnibus budget package, not for me to say, but there was some election cybersecurity money for that. Presidential primary takes place in 2020. It is a separate time from the regular primary. Why? Because we want it early enough so Colorado votes matter. And that's why it's at a separate time. Proposition 108. You always could, as an unaffiliated voter, walk into the polling place and cast a ballot simply by affiliating. You could do that up to 6:59 p.m. on Election Day. But Proposition 108 changed that, so we will now be mailing ballots to folks as well. If you're an affiliated voter, you're going to get the ballot for your party. Unaffiliated can select in advance. Chuck talked about that. If they don't do that, they get both. We then have all sorts of rules that govern, and we won't read through these, but what happens if they return both of them? Then we have a bipartisan team that has to review the ballots to see if they voted both of them. And that has to be done in a way that preserves the voter's anonymity so that you don't know how that particular person voted. And so there are rules that govern that. And yeah, there's all sorts of fun rules. And we'll make this available to the league, the PowerPoint, so you've got it and can disseminate it. Who's going to vote? And for some reason my slide kind of edged off, but that's okay. This was a survey of unaffiliated voters. You can see that there is a higher proportion of those who are young, and they lean more left of center than right of center. 39% said they intend to vote in the primary, 28% were undecided, 33% said they would not vote in the primary and had no interest in doing so. Majority said they planned to vote in the Democratic Party. That number flipped in El Paso County. And there are, for example, races in which the favorite in the general election is the winner of the Republican primary. It's the opposite in Denver. People tend to vote in the one that has more competition. Chuck gave you the El Paso numbers, where Republicans were leading by about 3-2 in terms of those who made a choice. You'll note the statewide number is different. So more likely to take a Democratic ballot in advance. That's about 4% of the statewide, just under, about 3% of the statewide unaffiliated voters have made a preference. The other 97% will get mailed 2 ballots. And we dearly hope that they do not vote both of them, because doing so invalidates the vote. So how do we help with this? Well, we did not have a state issue on the ballot last year, so I had a little bit of extra money in my budget. I went to the Joint Budget Committee and said, please let us spend some of that money, specifically $900,000, on an ad campaign to try to reach unaffiliated voters to let them know about, first, the opportunity to vote in the primary. Over half the ones we surveyed did not know they could vote in the primary. And then second, to make sure they pick one ballot or the other and not both. And so we began that process. Choice happens with you. It's the You Choose campaign. Democratic ballot or Republican ballot, vote on one. And if you are affiliated with a party, you have not seen any of these ads if our people have done the job right. It is primarily a digital ad campaign. For those without a digital footprint, it is targeted on, it uses some mailings. For those with a digital footprint, we can figure out who you are. In case you think that's odd, over Christmas I bought some shirts. Now I see a lot of shirt ads. They know who you are, and so do we through the campaign. We then did some rollouts, and we started in Grand Junction. We did it on the Capitol, but we also did it here in Colorado Springs. And these big yellow U, we also have some painted U's around. So that's what we're doing. That's what the office is engaged in. That's my office number. That's my cell phone. As far as I know, I'm the only statewide elected official crazy enough to give out his cell phone number. I'm also the only one who didn't run for governor. I'm also the only one from Southern Colorado. In fact, in the history of El Paso County, there are 3 statewide elected officials from El Paso County. Anybody want to guess who the other 2 are?
John Suthers?
John Suthers. Okay, that one was easy. Who was the other one? John Love. John Love, former Governor Love. Those are the 3 in the history of our county who've been elected at the statewide level. But that's how you can reach me. I am happy to answer. Chuck and I will now throw it open to questions and to your heart's content. Fire away. Yes, ma'am.
So when some of the bills that were being floated about unaffiliated voters, there would be transparency as to which affiliation the unaffiliated voter chose. I don't know how that wound up.
Sure.
Is it public?
Yeah. House Senate Bill 17-305 clarified these things. First, just so you know, it has always been public record in Colorado who's registered to vote. It's always been public record which address you're registered to vote as. Your year of birth is public, and your affiliation, and whether you voted in an election is public. If you've ever walked for a candidate, if you've ever done a mailing for a candidate, if you've ever done a phone bank for the candidate, it uses this information. Why is it public? Well, first, it's the law, not something I said. But the other reason it's public is so that you are not telling a candidate, you lost the election and a lot of people voted and they didn't vote for you, but I won't tell you who they are. There's secret masses of people who voted for the other person. Isn't something that we're comfortable with. So it's always been public which election you voted in. Senate Bill 17-305 clarified that that continues to be the case. And so if you are an affiliated voter and you choose to vote in the Republican primary, that will be in the voter record. If you choose to vote in the Democratic primary, it does not affiliate you. It does not mean you have to vote for either party in November. It simply means there's a record that that's the one you voted in. And if you're in El Paso County, you very well may have chosen in the past to register to vote. In fact, I ran into someone downtown, this is 15, 20 years ago, and he was running for an office now, and he changed his affiliation from Republican to unaffiliated. And I asked him, why did you change? And he said, well, I was only a Republican so I could vote for Marcy. That's what he told me. It's the only reason he was a Republican. Now he doesn't have to do that. Now as an unaffiliated voter, he does not have to make that choice ahead of time. But which choice you make is public, but it doesn't mean that that's who you support. It just might mean that was the interesting race. Maybe you work in the sheriff's office and you really want to have a say as to who your sheriff's going to be, who your boss is going to be. If you work in the clerk's office, I think the Democrats have a primary. The Republicans don't. So if that's your big issue, you might want to vote in the Democratic primary. So doesn't mean it's you're affiliated, but it is public record. There's no scarlet letter that attaches or blue letter that attaches either way. Other questions?
And Wayne, we'll need to repeat the questions because so we can get it on the tape.
Thank you. Okay.
This is for Chuck in terms of all the way back to mailing of the ballots. So the majority of ballots will arrive on the 5th or the 6th, would you anticipate?
I would say, but that's always give me a caveat on the Postal Service, right? So
Hit the mail stream on the 4th.
For
Yes.
but arriving in mailboxes, it'll
We're
be
hoping
5th.
by the end of the week.
yeah, I think we
people will have them.
tend to couch that a little bit, but by Friday of that week you should have it. If you don't see it, whether you get Friday morning or Friday afternoon delivery, please give us a call at 575-VOTE. And there's a barcode on the ballot so we can see. Was it in a bag of ballots that didn't get offloaded off the truck, and that truck ended up going back up to Denver? So we can, if we see that there's a group of ballots that are now back in Denver, we can call the Postal Service and find that. So, you know, I'm optimistic. I always like to think good. We have seen generally, you know, the 80132 zip code coming down from Denver. That usually gets deposited first. You know, that's true for motor vehicle renewals. I see that. They get hit a little bit earlier because that's the first place that gets dropped off, and it's usually in time for the afternoon mail routes. So, but if you don't see it by Friday of that week, the 8th or the 9th, let our office know.
Let me follow up on that if I could. The larger issue, I mean, whether you have 18 days or 15 days to figure out how you want to vote isn't quite as critical. The larger issue is on that return.
Yeah.
And 4 years ago, primary election in Conejos County, which is down in the San Luis Valley, there were individuals who voted in enough time, but they did away with the processing center in Alamosa. So now the ballots from Conejos County, the southern tip of the state, go to Denver to be processed and then go back. The Democratic primary for sheriff was closer than the number of ballots that showed up, in some cases, more than a week after they were mailed. And so the losing candidate sued, and the court said, sorry, they have to be back in the clerk's hand. There's no way to know when a ballot was actually mailed. Postmarking doesn't always occur. So what I did as Secretary of State is helped fund, Chuck showed you the drop boxes here in El Paso. I helped fund drop boxes in every county in the state so that they could have a place to return that ballot to. And in a lot of counties, there's only one place, but it's usually in that central commercial hub, that main city. But you can actually return it any place in the state, and it still counts as long as you get it in by 7 p.m. on election night. So if you get stuck in Denver and you have your ballot with you, and you're saying, oh my gosh, I-25 is clogged, you could pull off in Castle Rock, drop it at the clerk's office in Castle Rock, and that ballot will count for the election.
Denver's good about getting to the general mail facility up there and getting those ballots at 7 o'clock for us, and they'll let us know, hey, we got 24 ballots for El Paso County, and they'll FedEx it down to us the next day. I've gotten a ballot for Larimer County that we picked up in our general mail facility. It's like, why is something from Fort Collins down here? But we picked it up, and we by 7 o'clock and got it to them the next day.
So Wayne, do you see trends in terms of what percentage of the voters are immediately mailing in their ballots compared to sporadic, compared to the end? I've heard it's a third, a third, a third.
It's kind of like a bathtub. So there's a spike at the beginning, and then midway through, it's a trough, and then it's a radical spike at the end, right?
Yeah, and so you probably have noticed that about shortly between 7 and 7:30 you'll see election results. That is because clerks can begin processing ballots more than a week ahead of time. So that initial spike, because there are some people who as soon as that ballot comes, they know who they're voting for, they turn it in, they immediately return it. Those ballots are processed, and so the clerk can release those results. But if there's a huge influx of ballots that get turned in the last couple hours of the day, that's not going to get processed by 7:10. It's going to take a long time because they have to be brought back to the central facility, they have to be scanned in, the barcode has to be scanned in, which then pulls up the signature has to be verified, and then the ballot has to be processed. So it does take a while, but Chuck's right, it's kind of this trough. About 2/3 of all ballots statewide were returned in drop boxes.
It's a little higher here. It's almost 75% here.
Yeah, so it is the preferred method. That way you know it's there, and you know it's counted, and you don't have to worry about, how many of you have ever gotten one of those beautiful plastic things with the remnants of a mail piece? We care. I mean, the right to vote is so important, I don't want to put it at risk. And so that's why I use the drop boxes. They're secure, they're video monitored, so you know they're safe, and you know that ballot's going to count as long as it gets to you.
You know, in the last couple of days, we're doing multiple runs to those so that we get them in a timely manner. So.
Other questions? Do you have anything?
I have a
Okay.
question?
Okay, after me.
So thinking about changes that you had mentioned on one of your slides, Wayne, that you're going to change some things for this election, that you learned some things from the last time. Can you talk a little bit about what's different this time? And
Yeah, what's different in this election? Repeating it for the camera as I finally remember. My apologies for the others. In the risk limiting audit, the original software we did only allowed a single ballot team from each county, a single audit team from each county to be inputting the results. In a close election in which you might have hundreds or thousands of ballots to review, that would be a horribly inefficient process. So that is probably the major thing that we've addressed. We continue to, and I know my friends are always annoyed when I come up with new election rules, but I know I've issued 2 emergency rules recently that address specific issues. I'll tell you what they were. One of them dealt with, okay, so we said we check signatures. Let me give you the background on that. We check signatures. Everyone is checked. If it doesn't match, the voter gets a letter. It says you have until 8 days after the election to return it. So in a close election, we had one county that was saying 8 days means 8 actual days, so at 7 p.m. on the Wednesday, it's the deadline. And we had another county that was allowing ballots to show up as late as midnight on that day. So I don't want an equal protection claim or anything else like that, so I issued a rule clarifying that because the clerks pointed this out to me. And the other one we just had a decision from the Colorado Supreme Court whose initial language said, if you don't own property, you can't vote in Colorado if you're not in Colorado. So you're a missionary that goes away, you and your family go to China, you would lose the ability to vote if you gave up your home, which you might have, by the way, sold so you could do that because you can't support 2 households. If you were a Peace Corps volunteer, you would lose your ability to vote. So we issued, I think today, or we're issuing on Friday, this may be a pre-notice to you, rules that clarify. First, we got the Supreme Court to clarify their decision, to walk back a little bit on what they said. And then second, we're issuing rules that clarify that if you have left the state, you're still a Colorado resident, and you want to vote, you do it based on where your last residence address was. So that's an example. We always learn things every election. Something comes up new. And we're always trying to make it better. And one of the reasons Colorado has been successful is because we've been willing to do that. There has not been a session of the legislature that we have not had legislative bills in. This year we had an election cleanup bill. We had an election finance cleanup bill. They both passed. The Senate is an 18-17 Republican. Actually, it's 18 Republican, 16 Democrat, 1 unaffiliated. Anybody want to guess what the vote was in the Senate on these 2 bills?
Unanimous.
Unanimous, 35-0. They also both passed the House, one unanimously, one with just a few no votes. So we're always working on trying to make it better. So one of the things we've been effective on is working with the legislators, and so I think we've had about 24 bills, and all but 4 or 5 of them have passed over the last 3 years I've been Secretary of State. I should note, there is a constitutional amendment that will be on your ballot, and we ask for your support for it. This is not my official hat, this is my proponent hat. How many of you have ever seen the questions for judges on the ballot?
Retain.
Right. And you notice that we ask the same question over and over and over again. And if you're in Denver, which has a Spanish language requirement, it's asked in 2 languages over and over again. That's because the Constitution requires that. With a unanimous vote in both the House and Senate, they referred a constitutional amendment at our request, triggered by some points for some clerks around the state, to consolidate those So, shall the following judges of the 4th District be retained? Teresa Cisneros, yes, no. Gilbert Martinez, yes, no. As opposed to asking the same question over and over again. So, I would encourage you come November, if I don't get to see you between now and then, to consider supporting that because it's easier for the voter. You get less voter fatigue, it's cheaper, and it makes the print bigger.
Yes.
Which, as I get older, is really an important thing for me. So, sorry about that aggression.
I think the other thing I want to note, about the cooperation in the House and the Senate is, I've been to national conferences on elections, and when you talk to your cohorts in other states, they remark at the cooperation that all clerks, we all pull together in Colorado, whether you're a Democrat, county clerk and recorder, Republican. We all are committed to doing it right and doing what's best for our voters. It's something that's unmatched in other states, and I think that leads to why we're able to do some of these things and be one of the safest, one of the best places to vote, and it's because we take off our partisan hats and we get the job done.
Yes, ma'am.
I don't know how much of a question this is, but one of the things that I'm concerned about is confidence in the voting system. And as you mentioned, Colorado is doing really well in instilling confidence. Despite really good efforts on many organizations and your office's part to educate unaffiliated voters, do you have a plan about reporting back or explaining away invalidated ballots that will inevitably
Yeah.
happen?
So the question is, what are we going to say when ballots get invalidated because people tried to vote in 2 separate elections, in 2 primaries? And look, if you look historically, the majority of Coloradans have voted for Democrats and Republicans. Every election I remember, we've elected both Democrats and Republicans. The last election, we elected a Republican regent, a Democratic senator, and Democratic electors for president. The one before that, we elected a Republican Secretary of State, a Democratic governor. There are people who like folks in both parties, and that's okay in the general election, but it's not in the primary. And so what we're trying to do, by the way, in the ballot issue, I think the Blue Book or our response said we anticipated somewhere, I think, in the single digits, but high single digits of votes that would be invalidated. Part of our response is we tried really hard to tell people. That's why I went to the Joint Budget Committee and got approval for a $900,000 campaign, which, by the way, has been supplemented for a lot of clerks. They have also done their own information campaigns. It's why we really appreciate the League being here tonight and your willingness to share that important information. Pick one or the other, but don't pick both. Choose
We
one.
have it on our ballot instructions. We have it on our secrecy sleeves, on the outside our envelope.
So part of it is we tried. The second part is going to be the ballot language was really clear in Proposition 108 that if you vote in both, your ballot does not count. And then based on what happens, we'll look at, is there some way we can do it better going forward? I think Proposition 108 and Proposition 107 are both statutory. So the legislature has the ability to make fixes where needed. We've done some of that already. As it originally was, you might have some counties that had one ballot with both races on them and another county that might have 2 separate ballots. We went to the legislature and we did say, for the purpose of messaging, we need a single message because most people live in a world in which they get news from other counties at times, particularly if you're where most of our voters are in Denver Metro. Most people don't know which county they live in. Where do you live? I live in Denver. Well, no, technically you live in Arapahoe County or Jefferson County or Adams. So we'll look at it as soon as we begin to see those returns. We'll have that information. But it is part of it's going to be we tried really hard. And then the other part's going to be we'll examine how we can do it better in the future. But let me ask an obnoxious question, right? Let me do this. Each of you in the last election, I presume most of you probably voted in November, but some of you may have lived in a district that canceled their election. So you voted in the November before. How many of you read the complete ballot instructions you were sent? Thank you, sir.
You're breaking Angie's heart there. She puts a lot of time
So-
and effort into that.
So we know that there will be many people who will not read them. You're a really informed group, and many of you didn't read them. So that's why we've done the campaign. That's why it's actually on the envelope. That's why we've tried to convey that message. But ultimately, there is some personal responsibility to make that decision. And we will try, and we're trying. And if anyone has ideas of how we can do it better, we're all ears, as Ross Perot used to say. But that's our challenge.
As a point of clarification, you said upper single digits. Is that of unaffiliated voters or is that of total votes cast?
Of unaffiliated voters. The percentage, I forget exactly what the Blue Book said. Depending on the state, there's a few other states that have done something similar to this, and they had disqualification rates in the middle to high single digits. The other thing you do is you hope, as all election officials do, that you don't have races decided by a couple votes. But it's clear that we can't do anything. Now, I did add that requirement that even if they sent back 2 ballots, we're still going to check them to see if they voted both of them. Because we want to make sure if we can count that vote in any way possible, we're going to count it.
So we could tell voters that if they accidentally sent in both, but they only marked one ballot, that it will indeed be counted.
That is correct. If they sent in both but only marked one, it will be counted. I would ask ahead of time that we encourage them to only return one because it helps with the processing and keeps the costs down. And I had a few people say, but there will be ballots out there that aren't returned. Yeah, that's what happens in a mail ballot state. There have always been ballots that were not returned. Ever since we started mailing out ballots, there are ballots floating out there. That's why that signature process Chuck talked about is so important. My own daughter got a letter from this office when I was clerk saying her ballot did not count because her signature did not match. She called me up and said, Dad, why didn't you count my ballot? I said, well, let me check. So I walked into the election staff, because remember, I'm not, as clerk in a large county, I'm not one of the people with a code into that room. So I found someone with a code, we went back, we looked at it, and then I commended the judges for appropriately disqualifying her signature, because when she got her driver's license, it was a proud day for Wendy. She spelled it all out, but by the time she was a college student, it was a scrawl. But she used the process we have to get that ballot counted. That was important for me. I was running for Secretary of State. I needed at least the 6 votes in my family. I really cared, and so yeah, but that's the process we use. In a close election, by the way, it is a public record as to which signatures were not counted. And so both parties, both candidates will
get
be
that
out there
list?
running around trying to get it. We had a close commissioner race 2 years ago in a primary.
Yeah, and Commissioner District 4?
And both of those commissioners are going around. We've had close elections here. We've had school board elections decided by a single vote in the Harrison School District here in El Paso County. We've had a tax question fail on a tie vote. We've had a mayoral election that ended in a tie vote in Monument. They drew randomly. The losers of that drawing's daughter had not voted. So, I mean, that was about 15, 20 years ago. Cripple Creek just had a tie. They went with high card for who won, which seemed appropriate for Cripple Creek. Every vote matters, and that's why we're trying to make sure the process works as very best as we can. If you want to be an election judge under the change in the law that was just approved, if El Paso's full and you want to be a judge, you can work in another county even. We did that in part because Boulder couldn't find Republican judges. And so I approved it as an exception to the statute, Weld County judges to go in. It's critical. Every county in this state has bipartisan election judges. And so it doesn't matter what party the clerk is, because you have both Democrats and Republicans that are part of that process, and they're watching each other to make sure it's done properly. That's a critical component of our election system.
And they're watching each other, but by the end of the election, they're sharing recipes and family photos and so on, so they become friends too.
Talk talk about having either nonpartisan or unaffiliated representatives? Because now that we've moved to a system where unaffiliated voters get to participate, any conversation at all about having non-partisan involvement in overseeing some of that?
We do.
So the question is, Colorado law requires a Republican and a Democrat generally. You can use unaffiliated voters if you can't fill the slots. Is there any talk about changing that? The challenge is there are unaffiliated voters that lean significantly one way or the other. You saw the poll results there. You don't get that true opposition if you have a Republican-leaning unaffiliated voter and a Republican. And so that's why, for the most purposes, the legislature has not changed that rule. And why I'm not sure they will, because you want the two sides watching each other like a hawk. And if you've got someone who might lean one way or the other but isn't affiliated that way, you don't have that same dichotomy. And then we're trusting them.
And so it's not necessarily an either or, right? So you can have a third person involved, right?
You could triple the cost. Now, Chuck showed you that beautiful map of all those ballot drop sites. Every one of those is picked up by a bipartisan team of election judges. So if you added a third person, you would increase the cost of pickup by 50%, and you would discourage counties from having as many drop boxes. So you could, there's a risk. I think we are, what are we, where's the clock in this room, Chuck?
We got one more question, and
Chuck and I, by the way, will hang around for a little while and answer other questions. Yes, ma'am.
This is
Jan.
a different kind of topic, but what about petition gathering? How do you verify signatures on that?
Good question and timely question. So, up until this year, up until 2017, there was no requirement to check signatures on petitions at all. Some of you may remember 2 years ago, there were 3 instances of convictions for petition fraud, 1 from a circulator for a Senate candidate, 2 from initiative candidates. I went to the legislature and said, we need to do something about this, and technology has progressed to the point where we can. It's a more complicated process. Your ballot has a not your ballot, your envelope has a barcode on it that pulls up your signature when it's scanned in. When you sign a petition, I have no idea who in the world you actually are, and so we had to develop software. We did that, so we passed it last year in the legislature. I got support for it. I think it passed pretty close to unanimously. And so this year, for the first time ever, we verified signatures on candidate petitions. Now that represents a small number that I've got a little more time to do. The provision for initiative petitions has not been done yet. So first we got to get it perfected for the smaller group of candidate petitions, then we'll move on to the initiative petitions. And it's just done at the state level. So we'll also move on to the county level as well.
and on initiative, you got 90,000 plus that's got to be
Yeah,
checked, right? You know, they turn in 1.5 times, so you've got 140,000 plus on each of those dozens of initiatives that are out there.
And I have a very tight constitutional deadline as to how quickly they have to be responded. So in the future, it's my hope that we expand that. But the present standard uses, under the new system we adopted this year for the first time ever, we check signatures on the petitions. And so anyone certified by the Secretary of State, we know they actually made it, that those were actually those people who signed the petitions. There were a few candidates that got close but didn't turn in quite enough under the rules we're required to follow. But because of signature verification, we were able to tell the judge, yes, this person signed with a P.O. box instead of a mailing address, but it really is that person and the signature verifies. We couldn't accept it, but the judges did, and so several candidates who were close were able to get onto the ballot through that process of the judicial review where they use a different standard than the Secretary of State has to do.
So how many signatures are turned in or turned back because they don't match because the scrawl happened?
So the percentage of signatures that were rejected generally averaged about 5%. But there is a cure provision. And so just like we have it for ballots, candidates were able to go back and get people to submit the ID that actually shows it was them. So that's the process that was
But you
used.
do that for initiatives too?
I see. That's why we started small, and we'll figure out what works, and then in future years we'll look at what makes sense to do on initiatives. It's a challenging process, and we use a state agency in Pueblo that actually does the initial review. Runback developed new software for us to help parse out and guess which person actually this is, so we can figure out, because one of the questions you have to ask is, do they live in the district? Just because you are at the East Library does not mean that you live in El Paso County. It does not mean you even live in that commissioner district or that house district. So we have to figure all of that out. Again, Chuck and I very much appreciate,
Yes.
I'll let Chuck speak for himself. I appreciate you being here.
I wholeheartedly appreciate this.
Thank you for your time, thank you for your interest, and thank you for all you do to help the political process. We as election officials have tried to get out the word. We appreciate your willingness to help in that process. I will tell you the State League of Women Voters has been testifying on a number of these bills as we've gone through the legislature, has testified in favor of them. We appreciate very much that support. And Chuck and I'm volunteering him, we'll stick around and answer
Yep.
questions afterwards. Thank you for being
Yeah,
here today.
help us amplify our efforts in this area. And any ideas you think you got, well, bring them to us.
Yeah, by the way, on this campaign, we did have a bipartisan team. We had a Democratic senator from the Denver area. We had a rural Republican legislator from the House to give input to make sure this campaign was not tilted one way or the other. So we really have tried to seek that input, but anytime you are interested, we welcome it. And I mentioned the Bipartisan Election Advisory Committee is a public meeting. You do not have to go to Denver to watch it. You can watch it on the internet through our website, and all of them are archived, and you can go through and we will give you as much information as you possibly could want. Thank you for being
All
here.
right.